too early. Would you ask Professor Purser to come back in, please? Too early.
Oh, too hot.
Right, Professor Purser,
Yes.
you ready to carry on, I hope? Thank you very much. Yes?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor,
Yes.
onward. I now go to the occupants of flat 113 on floor 14, where Zainab Dean, Jeremiah Dean and Dennis Murphy were recovered from, and where Mohammed Al-Jali was in occupation before he fell from the tower. Now, can I ask you please to go first to page 153 of your report, at paragraph 836, where we pick up the chronology at 1:30, and doing a little of what I've done before with other occupants. If we can pick it up, please, at paragraph 763 on page 142. Well, I wonder if there's a simpler way of doing this. I can, I think, summarise this to you. You'll recall from your report that at about 2:13, the occupants of flat 113, who was Dennis Murphy, flat 112, who was Mohammed Al-Hajali and Omar Al-Hajali, and flat 115, Zainab Dean and Jeremiah Dean, were moved by the firefighters to flat 113,
Yes.
where they joined Alawasin Talabi, Rosemary Oweweli, and their daughter.
Yeah.
That's a combination of different paragraphs in your report, 763, 753, and 747. And I'm summarising. And then to remind you that soon after 2:13, further firefighters returned to flat 113 and advised the occupants to remain in the flat. You say, in two places in your report, paragraphs 765 and 767, which we can turn the page to 143, we'll see, 767, that there was some limited smoke.
Yes.
Yes. Limited smoke, and the exterior fire had not reached the flat yet, but the hallway had become increasingly filled with smoke from the lobby. And then if we go to 771 on page 143, we can see that at this time, which is about 2:39, you get that from 770, 4 occupants left flat 113, namely Mohammed Al-Hajali, Zainab Dean, Jeremiah Dean and Dennis Murphy, stayed behind. So
Yes.
4 left, and those individuals I've just named stay behind. And from calls made to 999 from flat 113, smoke conditions then deteriorated, and if you go to paragraph 791 on page 146, you'll see the time marks for that. That's 2:55 to 3:17. 791. Do you see that?
Yes.
You say from 3 calls made at 2:55, 3:06 and 3:17, the smoke conditions in flat 113 were gradually deteriorating over the half-hour period up to approximately 3:17. Yes?
Yes, so just to stop you briefly there and put a marker down. 317, we still haven't yet got the fire spreading to that flat exterior yet.
Exactly.
Yes.
And just to make that point, Professor, let's go back to page 141, paragraph 761. And you say,
Yeah, there we go.
there, does that help you?
Yes.
You say the pattern and timing of exterior fire spread was as follows. 3:17, south face fire still outside flat 112. At 3:33, the south face fire was outside flat 113 bedrooms. At 3:40, south face fire was outside flat 113 bedrooms and living room. And then over the page to 142, at 3:52 to 53, south face fire outside flat 113 bedrooms and living room. On the west face, the fire was still outside flat 114. And at 4:25, the west face fire was still outside flat 114. So that's where you set all those out.
Yes.
And then if you go to 793, please, on page 146. I'm sorry to jump around, but the story is told in a number of different places. 146, paragraph 793, at 3:48 to 3:55, you say that the conditions in the living room were likely to have deteriorated rapidly during that period. And then you say, and likely to have become unsurvivable within a few further minutes. Yes? So that takes you to
Yeah, just get my brain around this. Yes.
355.
Yes,
And you go
yes.
on. However, exterior views show no flaming outside the bedrooms after 358, although flames are visible outside the living room. Now, we then go to page 147, paragraph 798, and you say, Mohammed al-Hajali was shouting from the window for firefighters to spray water. At the end of the call, Mohammed al-Hajali said the fire had arrived. Hashim al-Hajali heard crackling and then the phone cut out. He could not reconnect. The call lasted approximately 30 minutes from Hashim's arrival. From the witness accounts, I estimate that this may have been approximately 3:50 to 4:05. This is the time period when the exterior fire spread around the flat 113 south living room. And then if you go to 805, please, paragraph 805 on page 148, thank you. You say, since no precise start time or other time information is available, I'm sorry, I should just back up a little bit. But this is, you're talking here about a call which happens at 8:03.
A long call, yes.
This is a long call, but we're between Zainab Dean and Francis Dean, lasting more than an hour and 15 minutes. And you say at 8:03, throughout this period, the call remained connected to Zainab Dean. At one point, she told him that Jeremiah Dean had collapsed. Francis Dean then passed the phone to CM Christopher Batchelor, who estimated that he remained on the phone for approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. Since the phone log for this call is not available, the actual call start time and duration is unknown. And then at 8:04, you can see what you say there. Stayed on the phone for 30 to 35 minutes. You could hear the little boy crying from the beginning of the call, then coughing, and then after about 30 or 35 minutes, he stopped coughing and crying. And you can read the rest of that paragraph on the screen there. And that's the background to 8:05. Since no precise start time or other time information is available for this call, the timing of events during the call is somewhat uncertain. From the sequence of events described and by comparison with the call from Omar al-Hajj Ali, I estimate that Jeremiah Dean died at approximately 3:45, before or around the time the exterior fire spread outside the south side of the living room. Christopher Batchelor stated that he then spent another 35 to 40 minutes on the phone to her in total. Zainab Dean eventually became less responsive, with a bit of coughing and spluttering, then silence for 5 to 10 minutes, with sounds of deteriorating conditions in the flat. And then at 8:07, you've got a call to Mohammed al-Hajali at 4 a.m. And at 8:08 on page 149, a call to flat 113, but that went through to voicemail. And if you go to paragraph 823 on page 151, please, you say there, 823, it's rather a long paragraph, but in the fourth line you say, it is likely that he fell, says Mohammed al-Hajali, that he fell from the tower sometime between approximately 4 and 4:26 a.m.
Yes.
So that's what
Yes.
we have there.
I think we should keep that one, flag that.
Yes, to flag that. Now, two other facts. First, the concentration of carboxyhemoglobin couldn't be measured in Zainab Dean and Dennis Murphy's test results. Mohammed al-Hajali's sample showed a concentration of 50% carboxyhemoglobin, but no cyanide detected. And you say that at paragraph 829 on page 152. If we can have that up, please. Now, I've shown a lot of that to you, perhaps not in particular order as in the way you've drafted it, but I hope in chronological order, so that you get some idea of it. If you next go, please, to page 153 and look at paragraphs 836 to 845. 836 on page 153. These are your conclusions. And just remind yourself of what you say in paragraph 836 to the bottom of page 153. And just signal when you need to turn the page, please.
Yes.
If you can turn the page, please, and you'll see then the rest of it and paragraphs 840 to 845. Just remind yourself, please, of those.
We may have to keep coming back to this because there's obviously so much detail. But
yes, I know. Well,
I remember I've got the basic picture. Yeah.
Yes, I only have a very few number of questions, but you need, I think, other people outside this room perhaps need to see the detail.
Yes, I think.
But you need to see it too.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, if you just read on to the end of paragraph 845. And tell me when you finished.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, since, as you have identified it, Mohammed al-Hajali was alive when he fell from the tower,
Yes.
and the fact that he had blood carboxyhemoglobin levels tested at 50%, does that inform the time of death of Dennis Murphy, Zainab Dean, and Jeremiah Dean?
It helps us to establish it. So, unfortunately, we don't know the precise time that Al-Hajj Ali fell from the tower because nobody observed it. So there's a bit of a window of uncertainty on that, which we've given as quite wide. I think
Yes.
we've said between 0405 and 0430, yes?
Well, you say in 845 between 0400 and 0426.
Right. Oh, yeah, okay. So that sometime in that window, I think that he fell, and right from my memory, obviously I've put a lot of work into this. It was a really complex set of data to try and analyse because there's so many not conflicting, but so many telephone conversations going on. But we don't have the logs really for them, so it's quite difficult. But am I not right in saying that? You may have read it out. One of Al-Hajj Ali's calls, he states that the other 4 occupants had become unresponsive. He observed them to basically at least be comatose, and if not dead. So he saw them close to death before he fell from the tower. Yes?
Yes, I mean...
No, he couldn't. He couldn't. I mean, he obviously couldn't verify whether they were actually dead, but they were. I can't remember his exact words, but I did reproduce them at one point. He basically said that they'd become unresponsive before he fell. So now they could have still been alive but comatose at that point, but they were obviously very far gone. This is the adults I'm talking about. So as far as the child is concerned, we have the statement by his mother sometime during this process that he had died. So from the mother's telephone call, we can pretty well establish that her son died while she was still able to converse on the telephone. And to fix the time at which she then ceased to be able to converse, and Dennis, was it? We have the evidence from Al-Hajj Ali himself, where he said that they'd all become unresponsive.
Yes, and just to pause there and take you to the reference, that's paragraph 812 on page 149. Just scroll back to that, just so people can see that. You see that? That's
Paragraph 812?
812.
After, yeah.
It's during the 30-minute call starting at 8:35.
Yes, that's the one. I put quite a bit of store by that, yes.
Right. I'm so sorry. Do continue, Professor.
And then I'm all the time, of course, I'm trying to juxtapose this against the fire conditions that we can observe from outside. But again, they're rather complicated this low down in the tower because they're affected by firefighting activities, and of course we have these references to water being sprayed. So the sort of time when serious loss of tenability occurs in flats 3 all the way up the tower due to the external spread is easier to distinguish on these upper floors. But by the time we get down to this floor, it's possible that it was burned out. There was very bad burning in that living room at some point. So it's possible it may have been, and I would normally, based on the other flats 3, be looking at somewhere around about 345 for serious loss of tenability in that flat. But I've given the option, if you like, somewhere in my text here, that because of these firefighting activities, it's possible that tenability, survivability was prolonged somewhat in that flat until after 4 o'clock. When I first started analysing this set, I found it difficult to believe anybody could have survived much after 4 o'clock. But I think because of these firefighting activities, that may have widened that window of survivability somewhat to periods after 4 o'clock.
Right. Is it possible that Dennis Murphy, Zainab Dean and Jeremiah Dean were still alive, although possibly unconscious at the moment in the range you've put between 4 and 4:26, that Mohammed al-Hajjali fell from the tower? Is it possible they were unconscious but still alive?
So, just to sort of step through that. So as I've just said, I'm putting some store by the fact that before he fell from the tower, during that call, and we have a time for that call ending roughly, don't we? When he said the others are unresponsive. What time was that?
It's a 30-minute call starting at 03:35. It looks like it's...
So about
last
4
call.
o'clock?
Yes, it ends at about 4:05.
Yeah, so if we say that 04:05, when he came off that call, and this is before he fell from the tower, obviously, at that time, the other adults, the child was presumably already dead, but the other adults were unresponsive and therefore comatose at that point, or even possibly dead.
Right.
So they were close. So I think that gives us a window of around about 4 o'clock. They were close to death at that time. Then we have to add on the uncertainty window for their gradual decline to the point of actual death. And so so it's quite possible that they were still technically, if you like, alive up to somewhere about 4:20-ish, but in a deep comatose state.
And is it possible that Zainab Dean, who was on the telephone to the firefighter Christopher Batchelor, was still alive but unconscious, even after she stopped speaking, at least for a period?
At what time?
Now that call ran on till about 3:45.
3:45. Oh yes, you could have been alive then. Yes. I mean, one of these calls, I have a problem with that very long call. The sort of timings seem to be too long to me and we don't have the call log, so it's a bit difficult to be certain exactly when that call finished.
Now, given the uncertainties about the exact time of death, are you able to record as a window of death time for each of the three, Dennis Murphy, Zainab Dean and Jeremiah Dean?
Yes, so we just said, I think somewhere, so I'm saying they were comatose, certainly comatose and possibly already dead at 04:05, yes?
That's the end that's the end of the Mohammed al-Hajjali call.
So they may have been already dead there, so that's one end of your window. But it's possible they were alive but in a coma and gradually sinking, so we can maybe add another 20 minutes or so to that. So stretching it to 04:30 at the latest, I would say. But that's, if you do a probability distribution of the time of death, I would put it at somewhere around about 4:10.
And what's the earliest point in the window? Do you think that death could have occurred?
04:05. Yeah.
04:05. Not earlier. Even in the case of the child?
He says they were. I'm not talking about the adults.
Right.
Yeah. Well, he said they were unresponsive by that time. I don't know what the latest time they were responsive.
No.
I think that's our best window, really. Somewhere around about this is the adults.
Yes.
04:05, 04:30 puts it very late to me that they could have survived.
So the window is essentially overlapping at the same time as the potential time of death for Mohammed al-Hajjali.
It does, because as he fell from the tower, you mean? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Al-Hajjali, yes.
Yes, I see. Yes, thank you. Let's then turn, please, if we may, to another occupant on another floor, in another flat. This is Abdeslam Sebar on floor 11 in flat 81. And you cover him in section 6 of your report at paragraph page 158, if we can go on to that. And again, I'll take you through the report on this very succinctly. He was alone, as you say, at paragraph 866, in flat 81 on the 14th of June. And then conditions in the flat at 867, you say, Abdeslam Sabah was aware of the fire by 0125 when he made a 999 call describing flooding and fire on the 11th floor. He made a second call at 1:33:12 stating that the fire was inside the flat. So you've got two calls there. And then at 874, if you turn please to page 159, you note that there are no further calls. You turned it to, yes, thank you. There are no further calls, but his grandson called 999 on 2 occasions to report that Abdeslam Sabah was in his flat. You see that?
Yes.
And there's a final call at 4:39:33 where his grandson stated that he'd been on the telephone to Abdeslam Sabah, who was choking and was then cut off. I infer that he was referring to the calls with his grandfather at around 02:36.
Yeah, so that was a 999 call made by the grandson, wasn't it?
Yes.
And he was then referring to, I think, earlier events. It doesn't mean the events are occurring at 04:39. Yes? The call was made at 04:39, but the events he was referring to, I believe he was referring to his earlier attempts to contact his
Yes,
grandfather.
and when you say 2:36, do you mean 2:40? Do you mean 2:36?
Yes.
You do?
I think I do, yes.
And then you can see that the first is at 2:46. There's a call at 2:46
Oh, gosh.
where you say he's stuck in the toilet of the flat.
Right, maybe.
And then a final call at 4:39 where he states that he'd been on the telephone to Abdeslam Sabah, who was choking, then cut off. And
Right, sorry, we need to step through this again.
Yes.
All right. At approximately 2:30, he stated he was dying and his son could hear he was finding it difficult to
Yes.
breathe. Shortly after this is 2:30, I've got,
Yes.
the connection ended and further calls were unanswered.
Right, I see. So that is a reference to the call.
Yes.
At about 2:30.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Again, we've got a bit of a confusing situation.
Right. So just to clarify that then,
And then that's right. And then the grandson made subsequent calls to 999, referring back to these events, I believe.
yes. So that's
I don't think these two call times mean that he's referring to events that were happening at that moment.
No.
He had previously spoken. But there's been a development, hasn't there?
well. Let's just stick with this for the moment.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
so just to be clear, that this in the last paragraph is a reference back to the call that you identify in 872.
Yes.
The 2:30 call, yes.
Yes.
And then if you go to 870, back a page, please, just to be clearer still, you note there at paragraph 870 that an image taken at 2:48 shows extensive flaming outside flat 81 and some spread across column C5 outside the flat 82 kitchen. Exterior fire outside flat 81 then subsides somewhat with periods of intermittent flaming until approximately 3:45. And then you identify a
Right,
large
so-
interior fire.
Just pause, please, for a moment. So the exterior fire, it was complicated at these low levels because there was an initial brief bit of fire outside, which then sort of subsided, and then it came back at a later time. So the exterior fire outside flat 81 then subsides until approximately 03:45. So 03:45, there then appears to be a large interior flaming fire at the window openings of flat 81. So now we've got evidence from the exterior fire that there's a big fire inside that flat at 03:45, continuing for some time.
Now, then go to page 159 at paragraph 878. Just to pick this point up while we're here. You say,
Paragraph.
878, you say that his
Yes.
body consisted of heavily charred remains with some preservation of internal organs. His lungs were edematous and there was soot in the airways with erythema of upper airways, no clear evidence of burns or trauma before death. His blood contained an extremely high, lethal 90% carboxyhemoglobin. Now, you described the lethal dose threshold for carboxyhemoglobin as 50%.
Yes.
Or thereabouts.
Yes.
Are the results for Mohammed Sabah of 90% carboxyhemoglobin explained in any way by him
Yes,
having
yes,
a higher
I think they
fatal
are, really,
threshold?
yes. Sorry, yes. And the paragraph above, we know that he was in the bathroom next to the bath. So if you, do we need to put the flat, let's put the picture up of the flat again.
Sorry, what would you... yes,
diagram of
MET
the flat.
30 is 12593.
Right, yeah, thank you. So we're in a flat 1, aren't we?
Yes.
Yes, so as you can see, so the scenarios we're talking about are that at this time, so 0345, we've got a large interior fire in that flat. I can't remember what I said, the living room, which room? The living room, I think. So the flat is in a really serious situation by this period. But, of course, a person in the bathroom is to some extent protected by the internal compartmentation of the flat. And that is a kind of last refuge, if you like, that somebody might shut themselves away in, and therefore survive. Really, when in the greater part of the flat the conditions are really pretty extreme, they could still survive there for some time until the fire and the smoke, and then eventually the fire destroyed that part of the building. So we have conditions where a person could shelter there. The high concentrations of smoke and toxic gases in the greater flat are going to gradually penetrate into the bathroom refuge, but not so much the heat. So you're protected particularly from the heat. You can't avoid the gases, but you can delay them to some extent. But you could survive in that location for quite a long time while conditions in the flat are very bad. And that, I believe, is what happened here.
Right. Does that imply that it was likely he fell unconscious at a higher dose than the average 20 to 40% range?
Not particularly, no. I think he probably became unconscious.
Right.
Not that I would any particular reason to think that, no.
Right. Then let's go to page 160 of section 6, please, of your report, and I'd like you just to remind yourself of what you say there at paragraphs 879 to 883 under uptake and conclusions, all on the same page. Just remind yourself of what you say.
Yeah, so I think there's a key point here. 882, Abdul sheltered in the closed bathroom until about 0230, 048, when the exterior fire spread outside the living room of flat 81. So this is when conditions start to become extreme. During a telephone call with his son at this time, he said he was dying, and his son could hear he had breathing difficulties. Soon after this, the connection ended, and it's likely that he became unconscious due to inhalation of gases soon afterwards, I've said here, and then died from asphyxia.
Now, on that, could you just read on to the end?
Yeah, so his very high 90% shows that he was overcome by inhalation of asphyxiant gases. The flat interior was largely burned out sometime later, and his remains became charred. The exterior view shows a large interior fire, 0345 to 0431.
Now, can I show you IWS 402375? Because this is a second statement provided by Mohammed Sabah, his son. And this was provided to the inquiry on the 20th of May 2022, this year, not long ago. If we turn, please, to page 2, paragraph 7, he says, under the heading, phone calls with my father on the 14th June 2017. On the night of the fire, paragraph 7, on the night of the fire, I spoke to my father on 3 occasions, but for long periods of time. As outlined, the first was while on my way to the tower. Shortly after arriving, I spoke to my father again at some time between 1:45 and 2:30 a.m. I was constantly on the phone to him. At around 2:46, my son Eunice phoned the fire service. He told the operator that my father was in flat 81 on floor 11 or 14, and that he was stuck in the toilet and needed evacuating. And
yes.
then paragraph 8, after this I was able to call my father again. His landline had stopped working and I was able to reach him on his mobile. He was in the toilet and was struggling to breathe. I was on the phone with him until about 3:30 a.m. and I believe I heard him pass away or fall unconscious. I do not want to describe the events, but this was a devastating call. After the phone cut out, I sat on a bench near the tower in a state of utter shock. It was horrific. At 3:50, and then you don't need the rest. But the key point there is that the telephone call until 3:30, about 3:30 a.m., and believe I heard him pass away or fall unconscious. Now, it's right to think that you didn't have this evidence available to you when you were preparing your report, right?
Yes.
I'll come back to that in a moment. But first, were you aware of reports that water was being projected onto the exterior of the building at around the 11th floor on the east side of the tower?
I think I discussed that in my text.
Yeah, and might that have slowed the deterioration of conditions inside flat 81 from the external fire?
Okay. Repeat that time again? Water time?
Well, I haven't given you a time.
Oh, I thought you did. Okay. Well, as I said in my text,
I don't know what time.
the spread of fire at that flat was quite complicated because it occurred in sort of two bursts. So, if you remember, we had this rapid spread of fire all the way up the tower, up the east side of flat 6, right? From about 0120 to 0127, the initial flame spread up the tower. And so, of course, it had to go, as it went up the tower, in that very early stage, it had to go past flat 81. And as it did so, there was, and if you look at the videos and some of the images, you can see that there has been some degree of flaming around across the column and across part of flat 81, right, from flat 86 to 81. But that was fairly, and I think that was referred to. That's the early flaming that's referred to by the witness, in one of these phone calls, from Absalom. Then the fire outside that flat has gone out.
Now, just on that,
Yeah.
you asked me a question
Yes.
about timing, and of course I'm not able to answer from my own knowledge, but I might be able to answer from the record.
Yes.
Take this from me, that Natasha Elcock
Yes.
identifies her reference to water being sprayed in 999 calls at 2:37 and 2:44. And let me just take you
Yes.
back to your report at 151,
Yes.
please, at 823, in the light of that. Take that from me. And at 823, I don't think you take into account the application of water, except until the last 4 lines. And you say, from the
Yes.
witness accounts, there was some exterior firefighting activities with water sprayed over the flat around this time.
Yes.
If so, it's possible that these provided some degree of protection, enabling Mohammed Al-Ajali to remain in the flat for longer than otherwise might have otherwise been possible. Now, that's,
Yes.
of course, about flat 113, as you can see. Applying that logic at the same time to flat 81, 3 floors below.
Oh.
Do you see what I'm driving at here?
Yeah.
Is it possible, given what Natasha Elcock observed about the application of water between 2:37 and 2:44 or so, and given what's said here by you about application of water at the 11th floor, my question, do you agree that the application of water could have slowed the deterioration of conditions inside flat 81?
Yes, I do. And as I said, the time at which fire did spread badly past that flat was quite late in this sequence of these things. I mean, it's much earlier on higher floors, isn't it, for flat 1?
Yes. 113 is 14th floor, and 81 is the 11th floor. So my question again, do you agree that the application of water might be an explanation?
Yes.
Maybe you're speculating, but,
Yes.
but it's an... Now, given that possibility of building the blocks, let's go back to paragraph 882. 882, please. And this is back at flat 81. Just showing you that, you say there, Abdeslam Sabah sheltered in the closed bathroom until around 2:30 to 48, when the exterior fire spread around outside the living room of flat 81. During a telephone call with his son at this time, he stated that he was dying and his son could hear that he had breathing difficulties. Shortly after this, the connection ended, and it's likely that he became unconscious due to inhalation of asphyxiant gases soon afterwards, then died from asphyxia. Now, that's what you say there.
Yes.
In the light now of everything I've shown you,
Yeah.
further evidence from Mohammed Sebar, and the possibility, based on the evidence I've referred you to, and your own findings, about water being projected onto flat 81, would you revisit your conclusion about the time of Abdeslam Sebar becoming unconscious due to the inhalation of asphyxiant gases?
Well, I haven't given a precise time at which he became unconscious. I've implied that it was shortly after 02:30:48. I don't say what shortly means. I don't find any particular conflict with what I've written, but obviously in the light of the new information that he was last spoken to at 03:30, he was still alive in the bathroom at 03:30, and I find that fits quite well with the analysis I've made. As I said, he's in a protected area. Now, I looked at the images of the exterior fire spread. We can revisit them if you like. There was some exterior flaming spread past the flat at that level around the times I've stated. I think we went through them earlier, didn't we?
We did.
So those are based on my examination of the exterior flaming images from the exterior. So there was flaming there. And it's quite possible that, and as I said, at these lower levels, even several floors above, as we just discussed for the other flat, there was some, the fire spread was complicated by the interaction with these suppression attempts that were going on. So that may have somewhat prolonged or delayed the lack of survivability in that flat. But even so, the conditions are pretty bad in that flat from the time I've said, but by being, as I said, by virtue of the fact that he was in the protected bathroom, that gave him an unspecified longer period of survival until the smoke penetrated and the gases penetrated into that bathroom, which of course I have no way of really calculating, except to say that it would have been after these times here. So I'm not surprised to find that he survived up to or that he was conscious up to 03:30. I think that fits in with the sort of analysis that I've made.
And how long after that, after 3:30, also did you think that he died from inhalation of asphyxiant gases? If he became unconscious at about that time?
So let's say he became unconscious about 03:30. Sorry, do we have a carboxyhemoglobin for him?
We
Yeah, 90%.
90%.
90%, so that's very, very high. So 03:30, let's assume estimate that he became unconscious around 03:30 at a level of around about 40% carboxyhemoglobin. He's then got to continue up to 90, and he's in this protected space, in this long decline scenario. So we're talking about quite a prolonged period, maybe 20 to 30 minutes more to death. So 03:30 for loss of consciousness, 03:50, 0400, somewhere around about there for death, and perhaps even a few minutes later. I would estimate.
And that's an estimate, of course, like all these are.
Very, very approximate.
Yes.
Yeah. For a very indefinite kind of thing you're trying to estimate.
Yes, it is. And just on that, and perhaps for this deceased, but in general also, are you able to give some kind of boundary of error factor? I mean, is it plus or minus?
The trouble is, it depends on the individual circumstance and the gases, so it's very difficult.
No, all right, fair enough.
I'd rather not. Yeah.
Fair enough. Let's then turn to the final group I want to ask you about, which is floor 10 lift lobby. And this is Mohammed Nur Tuku, Ali Yawar Jafari, and Khadija Khalifi. And you cover this at page 162, section 6 of your report, if we can go to that, please. Now, you've set out the relevant facts here and the conditions on the floor. And taking this in summary, all three individuals are believed to have entered the lift together with Nadia Jafari and Ria Rojo.
Yes.
Yes. And I think from a detailed review of all the available evidence, you reached the conclusion, doing the best you can, that Mohammed Natuku, Ali Yawa Jafari and Khadija Khalifi did not have significant exposure to toxic smoke before entering the lift.
Yes.
And we can pick that up, I think, at page 169. If we just go on to that, paragraph 927, there it is, and that's what you say. Now, we know that, and I'll summarise these, that the toxicology tests carried out showed that Ali Yawa Jafari had carboxyhemoglobin levels of 47%, that's paragraph 719. Khadija Khalifi had carboxyhemoglobin levels of 66%, that's 919, paragraph 919, and Mohammed Natuku had carboxyhemoglobin levels of 73%, and that's paragraph 921. Now, if we then scroll up on page 69 to the figure 46, you've got a diagram there, or a chart there, which is entitled Effects of Exposure of Lift Occupants After Arrival at 10th Floor and Entering 10th Lobby. Just working through this, can you just explain to the panel what this figure shows, what we get from this?
Yes, so what I'm doing here is plotting the uptake of gases in an FED sense, and the easiest one to relate to is the calculated carboxyhemoglobin, which is the pink squares.
Yes.
So the lift got that to open on the 10th floor at approximately 0125. And at that point, I'm saying that the curve starts at 0. In other words, they had negligible exposure up to that point in time. And when the lift stopped at the 10th floor, the occupants of the lift described, before the lift doors opened, smoke pouring in and filling the lift. Very distressing situation. People were kicking and banging the doors and the buttons and things and trying to get something to happen. And a very chaotic situation. And eventually the lift doors opened, and for a short period, and these three persons are believed to have left the lift at that time. The lift doors then closed, and the lift, now containing Nadia and Ria Rojo, continued down to the ground floor. And according to Nadia, I believe, if I remember rightly, she believes the lift did not stop between there and the ground floor, where Ria Rojo felt it may have stopped a number of times. But when they got to the ground floor, we have an image, which is, I think, maybe in the chairman's report, but I've certainly seen this image, of the lift doors opening on the ground floor and smoke, them walking out of the lift and smoke coming, a plume
Wisping
of smoke
out of the top of the
top
lift.
of the lift,
Yes.
yeah. They said it cleared as the lift descended, it cleared, gradually cleared as they came down. So we have quite a nice time for when they got to the bottom, and we can see that they had that smoke there, and we have their witness descriptions of the conditions, the extreme conditions they encountered in the lift in that short period of time. And they have some estimates of the time for which the lift was there before the doors closed and it descended. I feel those might be slightly longer than the reality. It's very hard subjectively to assess these times. But there was a period of 30 seconds, perhaps to a minute, when that lift, before the lift carried on down. But the people who came out of the lift then collapsed and died in the lobby. And so Ali Jawa Jafari, his body was found quite close to the lift itself by firefighters sometime later, doing a search under the smoke. I mean, quite bad conditions in the lobby when the firefighters eventually got there to do this recovery operation. So he collapsed almost immediately after coming out of the lift, I believe. The other two were found in this. Well, I think we need the diagram again. Sorry.
Yes, MET 30 is 12593. Page 7, please.
Now, this is very helpful because it does show. So you can see here The proximity of the lifts, now I think it's the upper one, isn't it, that was working on the diet? The right-hand one, but anyway, one of these lifts was, they were obviously in one of these lifts.
Yes, it's that one.
And they came out, and it's really quite a short distance of travel to walk from there to the stair door, enter the stair and carry on down the stair. And if you were prepared for this event, you would think you'd have a game plan and you would be able to do that, even if the smoke was very dense. Potentially, you could do that without too much difficulty, I think. But the chaotic situation I described, I think these people tumbling out into this lobby, they were like to have been very disorientated. And the bodies of Kalufi and the other person, Tuku, were found more or less where the number 2 is on the diagram, I think, if I remember right.
Right. So they'd missed the stair door.
Yeah, they're in this sort of short, that's why I wanted the image putting up, because you can see there's a sort of short stub corridor that goes towards the entrance of flat 1.
And 2.
Well, 2 is, 2 at the beginning of it, but towards flat, the corridor goes to flat 1 at the end. And their bodies were found, I think, somewhere around about where the 2 is on this diagram. So I'm estimating that what probably happened was they tumbled out into this lobby. The conditions were extreme, very, very smoky, very, very high concentrations, as I said yesterday, of carbon monoxide and quite significantly high concentrations of cyanide in this situation. And they were acting around blundering around in this very extreme conditions, presumably attempting to find the stair door, but missed it and ended up in that corridor. And it's irrelevant, I think, that the pathologists found some physical injuries to these 2 persons, skin lesions and other things, as if may have bashed, fallen foul of various items in that area, which seems to me consistent with people in a struggle situation. They were attempting to find this door. And then they collapsed and died there with high blood carbox, well above the lethal levels. Now, just to complete this point,
Ali Yawa Jafari.
Yeah, he's got 47%,
Correct.
which of course is somewhat lower. But as we know, and I spoke about yesterday, he had quite a serious heart condition, so much so that as they left the flat, his daughter was concerned about whether he had his angina pills with him and this kind of thing. So it's not at all surprising to me that in this extreme situation, he would have collapsed very, very quickly and been overcome and died just after coming out of the lift. Whereas the other 2 would have been a bit more robust and carried on for a bit longer.
Yes, thank you. Can we please go back to figure 46 on page 169? Figure 46. But hold on,
Yeah,
I have a question, you see. Now, you've explained, I think, what the figure shows, but you, I think, strayed into other things, which is very helpful. And thank you. I just want to ask you specifically, how did you calculate the time to collapse?
Yes. In order to collect the time to collapse, I have to have a concentration of carbon monoxide in the lobby to put into my calculation. And I also have to have a concentration of cyanide, which I derive from the CO in the way we've described earlier. So from those two concentrations, and for the purposes of this calculation and the short period involved, I'm assuming a sort of more or less constant estimated average level in the lobby over that period of time, a constant level. I think this is probably on probably figure 45 has the actual gas concentrations I've used. But the starting point would be 10,000 ppm of carbon monoxide, and I forget the exact figure, but about 300 ppm of hydrogen cyanide. It's in the text somewhere. So where did I get those figures from? those are very rough estimates derived from my knowledge of the ratios of these gases and the conditions in these sorts of fires. We've talked about this yesterday. I believe that the concentrations in these lobbies, because people said it was hand in front of the face, very, very dense smoke, therefore this indicates we're talking about very high levels. But there's a considerable uncertainty about what those levels actually were. And so I've given quite a wide range of between about this is for CO, between about 5,000 ppm of CO, still very high, and 10,000 ppm CO. But for this calculation, this is the calculation for the 10,000 case, right? I think I might say. Assuming that the conditions were as I've just described, how long would it take for somebody to become unconscious under those conditions, an otherwise healthy adult? And the answer is, I'm predicting here for this particular data set, collapse within a couple of minutes. So I think I've got 012650 there. 3 persons entering the lobby collapse and become unconscious. And that's assuming the lift stopped at 012430. Yes, so that's so very rapid. So it really is an illustration of how quickly some can be overcome by these extreme conditions. But I've also considered an alternative case where the levels were about half that, but it still gives you a very, very short window of a few minutes. And I defend this partly by saying, well, if this was wrong by a factor of 5 or 10, and we were only talking about, say, 1800 ppm, as in the stair, that would have then given those occupants 20 minutes or so, or 15 to 20 minutes, in order to be able to find the stair. And the fact that they obviously didn't have that window of time available to them, they must have collapsed very quickly. Also, just moving on, we know they collapsed quickly because it wasn't soon long after that the occupant of flat 1 came out and tripped over their bodies.
Well, I was going to ask you about those two now.
So we've really quite a narrow, we can fix this window quite narrowly, I think.
Now, yes. Now, that's 933. So that's very helpful. Just to pick that up, please. Page 170. You say that approximately 131 Nagawa Nalakwago, that's I think Prosy, isn't it? Prosy Nalakwago, found the lobby filled with dense smoke. She stepped out of her flat into the short dead-end corridor leading from her flat entrance door into the lobby. The door to the stair is at the end of this corridor, immediately to the right. We've seen it on the map. As she attempted to move from her flat into the lobby, she fell several times over bodies on the floor. The final time she fell, her head hit the stair door, which opened slightly so she could see some light, etc. And then she managed to get out, as you go on to say. And then similarly in 934, around 14 minutes later, 144:39, Clarita Gavimi left flat 75, and she also crossed the lobby to the stair and descended, exiting at 149:09. Now, my question in relation to that is, and first of all, that gives you a time marker, which you've explained. My question is, why was it that those 2 occupants, Nagawa Nalakwago and Clarita Gavimi, were able to cross the floor 10 lobby to the relative safety of the stair and escape, whereas Ali Yawar Jafari, Khadija Khalufi and Mohammed Natuku were not?
Yes, that's very interesting. So if we take the case of Nalakwago, she was prepared for this event. She was in a flat where she lived. She knew where the stair was. If you like, she had a game plan. She stepped out and quite quickly crossed that short distance, although, of course, she had to fall over and pick herself up a couple of times. But we're talking of a short period, of maybe a few seconds and less than a minute. So she had time, and she was almost certainly holding her breath as much as she could to avoid inhaling this smoke. I think she actually said at one point she tripped and took a breath, so because she tripped over, as you might imagine. And she didn't, it wasn't with ease that she did this. As we said, she sort of fell over and happened to knock the door open, and there was a quite extreme situation. And it's also very interesting to look at Clarita Gavimi, because again, this is somebody who's making a deliberate attempt to escape with a game plan, but coming from flat 5 or 4, was it? 5.
Clarita Gavimi, flat 75.
5, yeah, flat 5. So she's got to negotiate this rather complex route that we've been talking about previously. She's entering, which we know are very hazardous conditions in there. It's an extreme situation. And she didn't just walk across and get out. She walked across, and she was somewhere in the vicinity of the door to the stair in quite a lot of distress when Lukic and his companion walked down from the floor below and somehow became aware of her struggling. I think she was struggling to open the door to get into the stair at that point, and they could have opened the door and went into the lobby and pulled her out. So she, I mean, if she hadn't had their assistance, she might have become another casualty in that lobby, I think, Clarita Gavini.
Right. But are you able to, in a sentence, account for the differences?
Yeah, so they had a short exposure, they had a game plan, and so they were able to make that transition, whereas those in the lift found themselves, if you like, deposited suddenly out there in a chaotic situation, and they unfortunately made a wrong turn and ended up in that blind corridor.
Yeah. Now, one more question about floor 10. Given the timing that you've entered into, and the time marks that you put into figure 46 in particular, are you able to tell us with any degree of confidence what the source of the smoke in the lobby in floor 10 was? Right,
so we're talking about the period, perhaps we should put the diagram back up. Yeah. 46.
Yes, 46, please. Page 169.
I'll put some times on there.
You do?
Yeah, so we're talking about this very short time window from sort of 01:24:30-ish to 01 sort of 25-ish, or 25, 26. Creepers are collapsing at 01:26:50, so just before 01:27, for example, with this particular set of estimated concentrations. So it's this very early stage. So, and the time of fire arrival outside flat 6.
So I think 120 from your...
120, yes. So this is but within about 5 minutes of the arrival of the fire outside flat 6 on that level. And so this is a time when essentially the burning fuels available to produce this smoke were the exterior cladding and insulation and window surround structural materials mainly outside the 10th floor. That was the main fuels that were involved in combustion around that time. Then you've got to add on a couple of minutes for the smoke to penetrate into the lobby. So I would say that it's likely that most of that source material that was burning to produce that smoke was the exterior cladding insulation and window surround complex, fuel packages 1 and 2, because there hadn't really been time for significant involvement of flat 6 contents up to that period of time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor, for that. Now, I'd like to turn to a different aspect of your report, which is section 5. And can we please have up DAPR 5011, which is entitled Section 5, extent to which different materials are likely to have contributed to the effects of toxic smoke on Grenfell Tower occupants. Now, is it right to say, just summarising the purpose and the findings of this section of your report, that in broad terms it was an attempt by you to establish 3 things, and correct me if this is wrong. First, what materials were likely to have contributed to the toxic smoke and gases that the Grenfell occupants were exposed to? Yes?
Yes.
Second, how that changed over time in different locations and dependent upon what was burning.
Yes.
And third, the concentrations of smoke particulates and toxic gases in the smoke that the occupants were exposed to.
Yes.
Yes. Now, can I ask you to start at page 12, please, paragraph 37. At the bottom of the page, and you say this. An important consideration with respect to the exposure of occupants to asphyxiant gases is the concentration ratio of carbon monoxide to hydrogen cyanide. The yields of CO and HCN depend on the carbon and nitrogen content of the burning fuel. The fuel load masses, composition and decomposition are described in section 2.7. Based on the estimated masses of PE and PIR burned outside a flat as the fire burnt past it, and from the carbon contents of these materials, I've estimated that they both contributed equal amounts of carbon monoxide to the exterior smoke plume. So the total concentrations of CO in the smoke would have been derived more or less 50-50 from these two materials, estimating 100% combustion of the polyethylene mass and 50% of the PIR mass. From the carbon, 63.5%, and nitrogen content of PIR, 6.15% N, and experimental data on combustion of PIR foam, the carbon monoxide stroke hydrogen cyanide concentration ratio in the smoke released during combustion is about 17:1. Therefore, including the carbon monoxide contribution from the polyethylene, when both are burning simultaneously, the nitrogen content of the mixed fuels is about 3.1%, and the carbon monoxide hydrogen cyanide concentration ratio in the mixed smoke is approximately 27:1. Similarly, PIR contains 3.65% chlorine, so the chlorine content of the burning cladding and insulation mixed fuel is about 1.8% chlorine. Now, the 27:1 ratio you've discussed yesterday, and I think at times today you've said that it's 26 or 27.
Yeah, it's sort of between the two.
What's the plus or minus? What's the error factor in that ratio?
I would say that's quite small.
Right.
Yeah.
You say quite small. Are you able to put a number on it?
I should have been prepared for this question, shouldn't I? I did think about this. If we go back to the percentage concentrations in the fuel themselves, they're pretty well exactly established. So I'd like to say something like 25 to 30 to 1 for that mixture.
Right, that's a range.
Yeah.
So lowest 25 to 1, highest.
Something around that region.
Thank you. Now, how much hydrogen cyanide did the polyethylene contribute, and how much did the PIR contribute?
So the polyethylene didn't contribute any cyanide whatsoever. It's a very simple
So
fuel.
naught.
It's all come from the only source
Right.
is the PIR.
Right. And were you able to distinguish the contribution of hydrogen cyanide as between the PIR and the phenolic insulation?
No, I did not consider the phenolic insulation at all. The reason for that was because we understood that it was a very small percentage component of what was on the tower, particularly on the upper levels where most of the burning occurred. We didn't have any real information about exactly how much there was or where it was. When Professor Steck and her colleagues did surveys, they did find some evidence for occasional pieces of identifiable Kingspan in various locations, but not a large amount. So I wasn't able to really consider its contribution. From the work of Professor Steck on small samples of these materials, obviously there was some nitrogen in the Kingspan, so it would have produced a small, and did in fact when she burned it, produce small amounts of cyanide. And I've commented on this in this section somewhere, and from memory, it's about a 30th, I think it was, of the contribution of cyanide from an equivalent mass of PIR. So a much smaller contribution of cyanide from the Kingspan, very small, really.
Yes, and I think...
And there wasn't much of it there anyway. Yeah.
Now, in paragraph 45 on page 14, paragraph 45, you've considered, you say, the implications of the results of Professor Steck's work on specific building materials at Grenfell. Did her work cause you to revisit the 27:1 ratio that you'd previously...
No. Well, I mean, I didn't feel the need to modify it, given the levels of general uncertainties about the whole thing,
Now, if we go back and we'll come back to this part of your report in a moment, but if we go back, please, to DAPR 605, page 21, paragraph 31. DAPR 605, page 21, paragraph 31. You say this: during the early stages of fire spread up the east side of the tower, the cladding and insulation was the main fuel burning as the source of smoke.
Yes.
Now, I don't need more than that. Is it fair to say that you consider fuel package 1 to have been the main contributor to the smoke in the early stages of the fire?
Yes, after a certain time, yes.
And what is and what do you mean by, or how would you bound the early stages of the fire?
Right, so I'm focusing particularly here on the period during which the fire spread up the outside of flat 6 from approximately 01:15/20, when it started to come up the 5th floor, up to 01:27/28, when it reached the crown of the tower. So that's the starting. That's the window of time between which it starts on each floor successively, obviously, in sequence up the tower. So that's the beginning of that period. And obviously, what I'm having in my mind is, at what point does the transition occur to fuel package 3, which is the contents of the various flats?
Yes.
Now, that is where we have a great difficulty, because whereas we can observe the fire going up the outside, we can't observe what's actually happening inside those flats. Now, I'm quite clear that I felt so this is where I went to great detail, and we discussed this yesterday, on the observations of the occupant. We're talking really here about flat 6 at the moment, aren't we? So I studied in great detail what the occupants of flat 6 said about what they observed and how they saw the fire develop as it came up past their flats, in order to assess this. And you remember I was saying that they didn't, in general, observe. They observed the fire confined to the sort of window area. And from all this, I was unable to really distinguish any time lag between involvement of the exterior cladding and insulation and the structural window surround, PVC and other materials of the windows. So to me, we really can't distinguish in terms of burning time and smoke generation between the combustion of fuel package 1, which is the exterior materials, and fuel package 2, which is the window surround materials.
Yeah,
they're more or less simultaneous. But where we have a difficulty is, at what point do we bring in fuel package 3, the flat contents?
Yes.
And that's what I've been trying to address. Now, so the occupants of flat 6, during the short period before they left, and they all left in a hurry, as we discussed yesterday, did not observe significant fire spread within the contents of their flats. So the observations that were reported were almost entirely still confined to the window structural materials. So at those early stages, and this really relates to the time that the lobbies were filling with smoke, which we discussed yesterday, which was, depending on what level you were in the tower, it was the time of arrival of the exterior fire plus 3 to 5 minutes at each floor level. So you sort of add that to the spread timings. During that period, the main fuel package that was involved was fuel packages 1 and 2.
1 and 2.
Now then, when, because eventually all these flats were completely burned out, so we had full total involvement of all the contents. There was huge contents fires, and it's a question of when did those fires, internal contents fires, become of significant size. And I think that would have varied from flat to flat. And the only objective evidence we really have on this is the exterior view, which I reproduced in a figure, which I've put in here, where you can observe the first signs of large, fully involved compartment fires in some of the flat 6 on certain floors. And the first external image which appears to show that was at about 149, I think it is. We can look it up in a minute. So there seems to be, so the picture I'm projecting here is that it wasn't that the fire arrived at the windows of flat 6 and instantly ignited everything inside those flats. It's a picture of the arriving at flat 6, igniting all the window surround materials, and then over quite an extended period of time, varying between floors and individual flats, eventually it started to involve in a significant way the contents. And at some point, fires tend to grow in a very uncertain way when they're small. And then when a fire eventually reaches a certain size, of about, I think it's about 5 kilowatts, then it can start to take off in a very dramatic and exponential way. So that would suggest that when one of those flats suddenly brightly lights up with a large interior fire, that the transition from a small interior fire to the large one almost certainly occurred over a period of a very few minutes just before that time. And previous to that, we're talking about relatively small fires existing in those flats. We do have 1 or 2 witness observations, but very few, of flaming fire behaviour inside rooms in different flats. There's one example of an occupant who described the Moses basket of his child catching fire and his bed, and I estimated that was about 10 minutes or so after the exterior fire arrived outside his flat. It wasn't a flat 6. There's 1 or 2 examples of that. I've obviously been looking into the witness evidence to see what I can find to give me some guidance on this point, but I think it's still, a very uncertain area we're talking about.
Now, Professor, I'm going to ask you some detailed questions, and it would be useful, I think, great,
yes,
if you could try and keep the answers a little bit more short and focused. Can we start with table 6, please? DAPR 605, page 47. And if we look at this table, these are estimated yields and volume concentrations of smoke and toxic gases from mixed flat contents compared to that of cladding and insulation. Yes?
Yes.
And is it right that your assumptions, as we've seen before, 100% of the polyethylene in the cladding burned and 50% of the PIR?
Correct.
Yes. And is it right that the 50% for the combustion of the insulation comes from Professor Steck's report, and particularly her survey of the extent of the burned facade?
50% was my original estimate in 2018, and then was then confirmed by their later much more detailed study.
Yeah, thank you. Now, I think if you go, please, to back to page 44, same part of the report. You've also, I think, updated table 4 with respect to the respective densities for PVC as measured by Professor Steck, and also for XPS.
Now we're in 1 to 4 here, aren't we? Oh, so which report are we in here?
We're into table 4.
Report.
This is your second report. This is your...
Sorry, of section... Which section?
This is section 5.
Yes, so that's correct, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you've updated those?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. We're still in section 5. If we turn on, please, to page 45, paragraph 157, you say... 157, you say, in the third line, based on the finding that almost all the PE cladding was burned, but only about 50% of the PIR insulation, the burning exterior fuel mass was approximately 50% PE and 50% PIR. Yes?
Yes.
Now, can you explain how you arrive at 50% PE burned if almost all of the PE cladding was burned?
No, yes. So the total fuel mass outside a flat of PIR was about twice that of the PE.
I see.
So if all the PE burns and half the PIR, and the half is based upon these residues that were left for PIR, whereas no residues were left for PE, so that gives us a 50-50 mix.
Right. Does that explain how...
Very approximately.
Does that explain how the 50% PE burning exterior fuel mass noted in this paragraph relates to your calculations based on 100% mass loss of PE?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. If we go to page 46 then, paragraph 160, and I think the answer, tell me if this is wrong, I think the answer you've just given us feeds through. You say, I've calculated Using the data from the BRE tests for polyethylene, LDPE, and polyisocyanurate foam, PIR, I've calculated the yields and concentration ratios for the exterior fire based on 100% mass loss for the rain screen ACM cladding polyethylene and 50% mass loss for the PIR insulation outside a flat. Maybe the answer is the same, but how does the 50% burning exterior fuel mass noted in this paragraph relate to your calculations based on 100% mass loss of PE and the yield of smoke and gases? Is it the same?
It should be the same, yes.
Right,
yeah,
I see.
Yeah.
And now, can we then go, please, to... well, I can show you Professor Steck's report. Mr. Chairman, we're in a sort of subtopic here.
Well, would you like a break before we embark on?
Yes, probably. We're going to a different document.
Well, I think we should then. Right. Professor Purcell, we'll have the afternoon break before we embark on Professor Steck. So we'll break now and we'll resume, please, at 3:30. The usual rules apply, please.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. 3:30, Mr. Phillips. And would you ask Professor Purser to come back in, please? All right.
That's fine.
Good, thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Hughes.
Yes, thank you. Can we please go to DAPR 5, which is where we are at the moment, page 47. And this is table 6. And in table 6, you can see that you've picked a 5 figure
Yes.
of 1.3 in one column and 1.5 in the other.
Yes.
Can you explain why you've selected 1.3 and 1.5?
Yes, it's partly, the exact figures depend partly on the data available from my data set, but essentially this is a fuel-air ratio which is moderately underventilated,
Right.
which I felt was the most relevant
And
for
why
this
have you
particular
illustrated-
case.
And why have you illustrated both scenarios?
I think no, they're both, those cases are partly underventilated, they're similar. So one is for the PR and PE and the other one is for the contents.
Right.
Yeah,
By
just, help,
contents.
just help me with this, if you would, Professor. This
Yes.
was a fire, as far as the cladding was concerned, which was burning on the outside of a building.
Yes,
Why did you consider a partially underventilated
Yes.
situation to be appropriate?
right, good question. So basically, depending on what I'm doing, I've looked at a number of different cases. And for some of the calculations in this section, I've used, I've done calculations for both the underventilated case, which is here, or the well-ventilated case. But here, I'm particularly focusing on the ratios, on the yields for using to calculate the ratios. And what I found was that the ratios that are between these gases was very similar, irrespective of which equivalence ratio you use, although the yields would vary.
Well, my question really was, why did you choose the underventilated model? Sorry. I mean, I don't.
Yes, yes.
Are you a fire scientist?
Yes, yes. So that's the one I've illustrated here. But when I looked at the data for both cases, these are what I've used for my FED calculations, and they depended on the ratios that are derived from these numbers, which I think is shown elsewhere. And the most realistic ratios that I obtained were for this case, but they weren't very different for the well-ventilated case. And that's why I've chosen this particular case here.
Right, thank you.
But later on, I discussed the extent to which I understand exactly the point you're making, which is that what were the conditions of combustion most likely on the exterior stuff, and that's addressed in this section of my report.
Right. But let me see if I can just pursue that a little bit more. Would you agree, Professor, first, that ACM was burning with freely available oxygen because it was burning in the open atmosphere?
Well,
Yes and no is the answer to that.
Why no?
So yes, the outer surface that's facing to the world would be burning under pretty well ventilated conditions. But as we saw from Professor Bisbee's video that he presented last week, and as you will see from the BRE test video, there was a considerable amount of flaming in the cavity between the cladding and insulation, involving the melting and dripping PE component on the inner face. In fact, it seemed to be, well, in that experiment, there was a lot of flaming on the inside. And that inside one, of course, is in a restricted space and therefore like to be under somewhat underventilated conditions.
Right, but comparing the two, would you accept that the insulation may, at least initially, have had less oxygen because it was in a cavity completely or hard up against the concrete curtain wall, whereas the PE was at least
partially
exposed to the air?
Yes, I agree, yes.
Right. And therefore, as the ACM burnt away, the insulation would have been exposed and the oxygen availability would have risen.
Could have risen. Well, in fact, what's happening there is that once the PE is more or less fallen away and finished flaming, the PIR component almost immediately seems to self-extinguish. It's a char-forming material, and that's why, of course, there's a lot of it left on the tower.
Right.
It didn't continue to flame on its own very much.
Right. But why have you used fixed, moderately underventilated conditions for the duration of burning when the conditions clearly varied over time and around the building?
This particular set is is used to derive the ratios that I used for my FED calculations. So that depended mainly on the ratios, and the ratios were actually quite similar for different. The ratios were although the yields vary, the ratios were quite similar for different cases, and I had to choose one. So I've chosen this one, which I felt was the most relevant case, as you'll see from later work. But this, of course, we're taking into account here not just the cladding and insulation fires, but also, of course, the later contents fires and what were the conditions under which the room burns were burning. And again, and basically also talking, I mean, I've done a lot of work, obviously, on the relationship between fuel-air ratios, equivalence ratios, and combustion yields for all these materials, which are all shown in detail in the BRE report that we've talked about earlier. And what we find with that is that the yields are considerably lower under well-ventilated conditions and then increase in a sort of curve like that.
Well, let me show you paragraph 230 from your Phase 1 report, if we can go to that. It's a DAPR 601, page 70. And I want to show you paragraph 230, please, there. And you say there, the LDPE cannot burn while encased in its aluminium skin, but does so when it melts and drips out from the aluminium outer layers, and also when they start to delaminate and expose the LDPE core. Since these processes occurred in the open air on the outer surface of the tower, it is likely that most of the flaming LDPE combustion occurred under well-ventilated flaming combustion conditions with relatively low yields of CO and smoke, similar to those shown in the upper section of Table 4.
Yes, I agree that that's what I wrote in Phase 1.
But has your view...
And that to still some extent, part of the time that would have also possibly been true, but from the results that, particularly of the BRE experiment, I would say that I'm moving to a position where there was somewhat more contribution for these outside systems with less well ventilated, more under-ventilated conditions.
Right, so your view changed?
Somewhat, yeah.
Somewhat, I see. And is it that you've changed your view that the PE would be burning under well-ventilated conditions to underventilated conditions?
To slightly underventilated
right.
conditions.
Well, let's pick that up then. Phase 2 report, please. Back to part. Back to DAPR 605, page 46, paragraph 162. You say. There in the last sentence,
yes.
For my main calculations of effects on exposed occupants, I've used data for somewhat ventilated combustion conditions. Do you mean somewhat underventilated? Well, let me pick it up 4 lines up. In general, it's my fault. I've gone in too late. 4 lines up. In general, the combustion conditions for large interior flat contents compartment fires at Grenfell and for the exterior cladding and insulation fire are likely to have been somewhat underventilated.
Yes.
That's the point I
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
And that's what you're saying.
Yes.
Right.
But I have done quite a few calculations in here for both conditions.
Right.
So.
And does that change, in your view, affect the general conclusions you were able to draw?
Not materially, no.
Right. Now let's go on then to section 5 of your report at DAPR 5011, page 32, paragraph 147. And this relates to the Reconstruction. Now, Professor, para 147, you say this: the flaming involved the exterior cladding and insulation was intense, but relatively short-lived at any specific location, so that the flaming period for the spandrel under the flat 26 equivalent kitchen window was about 5 minutes 23 seconds. And for the right side of the column for initial fire involvement next to flat 16 equivalent to self-extinguishment outside flat 26 equivalent was about 4 minutes 23 seconds.
That's from this test, yes.
From the test. Was it your conclusion that the PIR would have stopped burning after the first few minutes?
Yes.
And would you accept that the PIR was unlikely, therefore, to have had completely combusted within the first few minutes of the fire, but would continue to burn after the ACM had combusted?
I think most of the PIR would have extinguished soon after all the PE had gone. But I can't tell exactly. Well, we can look at the data from the graphs, but yeah. So I mean, the basic fact is that when all this flaming has gone, as you can see in those images just above there, there's a considerable amount of PIR that's left self-extinguished as a char on the surface there of the spandrels in this particular case, whereas for the columns it's pretty well all burnt away.
Right.
Shows in those images after the fire test.
And would there have been any continuing combustion effect from heat and flames coming from internal fires exiting through broken or missing windows?
When?
Later.
Much later on, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, can I ask you then to look at Professor Bisbee's work package report for Phase 2 at LBYWP2 601, page 4, paragraph 27. And he says, the data presented in this report also suggests that up to the point of local burnout of the ACM, in a worst-case scenario, wherein all mass lost from the insulation product is assumed to be converted into energy release through combustion/oxidation, and then turn the page, please, burning of Celotex RS5000 insulation is unlikely to have contributed more than 20% of the total energy released by any of the cladding system arrangements tested. Burning of the Kingspan K15 may have contributed up to 53% of the total energy released by the cladding system arrangements tested, and he explains why that is. Do those figures have any relevance to the contribution of toxic products that you've identified in your report?
And just to make sure I understand, this is an extract from his recent report on the experiments he did at Edinburgh?
Yes.
Yes. I did have a look at those the other day.
Yes, my question, do those figures have any relevance to the contribution of toxic products that you have identified in your report?
Loosely, yes. But we can expand upon that. So in these small-scale experiments that he did, there was a certain relative mass loss or involvement of energy from the Celotex and from the PE. And the energy release depends upon the heat of combustion, which I remember him discussing in his work. Now, the heat of combustion of Celotex is about half that of PE. So even if you burnt the same amount of both, you would get considerably less heat from the Celotex than you would from the PE. Also, which I don't think he talked about too much, and I think there's quite a difference between the way the huge assembly on the tower burnt and his small-scale experiment, because I noticed his video of his experiment went on for 10 minutes or so, but in 10 minutes on the real building, it went from all the way up the tower. So there are some differences here. But essentially, the contribution to the energy of the RS5000 was, as he said, less than that of the PE. But the mass loss, as we know from the survey that Professor Steck's group did, was about the same from these two components. And so in terms of yields of toxic products, it would be about the same.
Right, so it doesn't matter. Are you saying?
No, I mean, it's not inconsistent.
Right.
I mean, obviously there are nuances of degree, but because there's so much less energy coming from Celotex, you can burn a larger amount and get less energy out compared to the PE.
Yes.
But I think in the full-scale the involvement of the Celotex is somewhat greater than in Professor Bisbee's 1 metre square panel test.
Now, can I then ask you some questions about the BRE reconstruction, and go, please, to DAPR 5011, page 5, paragraph 9. And you say there, these findings for the origins of the smoke filling flat 6 after the arrival of the exterior fire are supported by the results of the BRE Grenfell fire reconstruction experiment. During this test, there was significant and rapid smoke penetration and filling of the equivalent of flat 26 kitchen from the exterior fire when flames reached outside the kitchen window. This was followed very rapidly by flames entering through and igniting the kitchen extractor, then spreading to the window surround and penetrating through the insulation at the side of the window. Flaming then subsided after the exterior cladding outside the kitchen was consumed and the remains of the insulation self-extinguished. Toxic gas measurements of the smoke collecting in the flat 26 kitchen indicated an approximately equal contribution from the burning polyethylene PE cladding and the polyisocyanurate PIR insulation, with a further contribution from the burning UPVC window surround. Now, on the basis of that, is it fair to say two things? First, that the origins of the smoke penetrating the flat sixes was composed of fuel loads 1 and 2.
Yes.
Yes. And secondly, that there was an approximately equal contribution from the PE cladding and the PIR insulation to that toxic smoke.
Yes.
Now, in relation to the second of those conclusions, would the smoke not also have had a contribution from fuel package 3, namely the contents of flat 16?
Flat 6D?
16.
Oh, 16, sorry.
The flat
well, no, it had been extinguished by then.
And so nil.
Yeah.
Now, can I ask you then to look at... I see. Can I ask you just to look very briefly at Professor Torrero's evidence?
Sorry, just at the very early stages, as it spread up, there could have been some, I think I mentioned this in my report, but during this late stage, these gas measurements were made right at the very end of the test, so long after the fire in the one below had been extinguished.
Now, cutting through the point, actually, I can take this more shortly. Do you accept that the BRE reconstruction fire was different from the original flat 16 fire at Grenfell, because in the reconstruction the fire attained flashover, whereas in the original fire in flat 16 it didn't?
Yes, I haven't particularly concerned myself with the nature of the... I mean, obviously the reason for doing this was to replicate the entire scenario, concentrating on what was happening in flat 16.
Right.
But my only interest here is not what's happening in flat 16, it's what's happening on the cladding insulation. So what you might say may be true, but I haven't really examined this issue as relevant to my work.
Right. Well, would you... given the difference, though, between the BRE reconstruction and flat 16, namely that in the former there was flashover, but in the latter there was not, does that affect the reliance that you're able to place on the BRE reconstruction for the purposes of your toxicology opinion?
I don't think so, no.
Right. Let's go to page 26, please, in the same part of this report. Same part of this section of this report, paragraph 117. And this is looking into a little bit of detail in the BRE reconstruction. You say on page 26, can we go to page 26? Paragraph 117. The BRE team constructed a hood to enclose a headspace under the kitchen ceiling area with a half-metre downstand so that a temporary smoke layer could form before spilling out and rising above the experimental rig to the extract hood above. Sampling probes were placed in this headspace to enable sampling of toxic gases.
Yes.
Yes. Now, I don't know whether you're qualified to give this opinion, but if you are, if you're not, say so, but if you are you able to tell us how long might smoke stay in that temporary hood? Does it fall within your area of expertise at all?
Well, yes, I suppose so. I mean, seconds to minutes. I mean, it's spitting out, yes.
Right. Now, if we go on to paragraph 119 and 120, it is said that there were 2 points for the sampling of smoke and gases during the test, one from the calorimeter hood and another specifically for gases collecting in the flat 26 headspace.
Yes.
Unfortunately, both these measurements failed during the test, so that no calorimeter gas and smoke data were obtained, and flat 26 headspace samples were obtained only for a short period near the end of the experiment.
That's correct.
And if you go, please, to page 38 in this section of your report, page 38, figure 511, you can see that the failure happened around 9 minutes into the test and restarted about 26 minutes in. You see that as a gap?
Yes.
Yes. Are you able to agree with this proposition, given that it's in your report,
All right.
that the data about the concentration of toxic gases, irritants and smoke were not collected at a time when their quantities would have been at their most dangerous?
Yes.
Yes. Does that affect your opinions and conclusions in any way?
I mean, I can only work with the obviously the evidence I've got. I've commented on this in my report, and I've said that they could have been somewhat higher during this missing period. But that's all we can say. I mean, sadly, it was lost.
Very good. Now let's turn on then to page 37. Oh, sorry, back to page 37, paragraph 168. And you say there, these temperature readings indicate temperatures at the face of the PIR capable of decomposing the aluminium foil covering and igniting the surface of the PIR. Since the PIR surface forms a protective char when exposed to flame, and since the flames are partly derived from the burning polyethylene of the cladding at this time, these high temperatures, although indicative of at least some surface combustion of the PIR, which occurs above about 650 to 700 degrees centigrade, do not establish the depth of burning penetration of the PIR foam surface. Now, what did you observe yourself from the BRE reconstruction about the burning of the PE?
Well, it basically all was burned away.
Do you know when it ignited? You have a view about timing.
Well, yeah, it's discussed in my. I think it's shown in my tables and the images from the fire.
Were you able to form any view about its contribution to the smoke?
Well, yes, it was the smoke. The smoke penetration into the kitchen was the time when all these materials were burning. And there's a difference between with respect to the PIR, there's a difference between the performance of on the spandrel and the column, which I talk about in the text. But I'm just really reporting, observing the minute-by-minute results of this test.
Right.
And obviously up front I've said this is just one example of the way things can go. I mean, we have to emphasise this.
Yes. I mean, I'm just trying to get a feel for the extent to which you relied on the BRE reconstruction and the features of it. I won't call them defects because that would not be neutral, but the features of it.
I think the expression I put in my report up front was I've made the best of the information that's available to me and interpreted it as far as I'm able to do so. You know, obviously we would. There's a lot of uncertainty about a lot of this whole subject area, and unfortunately we don't have the information to make really definitive remarks. But I think there's some quite useful stuff that's come out of this test, and I've interpreted it as I've found it.
Right. Go to 182 on page 39. Let's see if I can speed up with this then, in the light of those answers. You say at 182 that from the different gases measured and the elemental composition of these fuels, it is possible to determine which contributed to the total mixed smoke under the kitchen headspace during the sampling period. Is that how you were able to calculate the output of carbon monoxide in table 5.3?
Yes, and this is why I mean, again, we've just shown how this data has got some issues, but as far as it goes at face value, this interpretation demonstrates that the conditions of combustion were more towards, for the whole system, both the PE plus the PIR, and particularly the PE, were somewhat towards the slightly underventilated.
And given that, well, if you look at page 40, please, and para 185, you say there that the only fuel producing HCN on the BR reconstruction test was the PIR.
Correct.
And that's consistent with your view that the PE produced none.
Correct.
Given that the measurement had only collected gases for a temporary period towards the end of the reconstruction, have you adjusted your calculations to account for that?
No, this only addresses that period when we were collecting the data.
Would it be fair to say that you've assumed that your calculations, based on that 10-minute period between 25.5 and 35.5 minutes, applied throughout all the stages of the fire?
Right. These calculations are based on the data that was collected during that period. I haven't really commented on the rest of it, but I would expect it to have been somewhat similar. But all I can report is what's happened in practice at this point.
Certainly, but would you consider it a reasonable approach? Or
Yes. For the period, for that 5 minutes or so when the whole of that face was burning, as you can see in those images, these are the sorts of conditions that we're getting. Yes.
My question, to finish it off if I can, would you consider it a reasonable approach or assumption to extrapolate from that 10-minute period throughout all the stages of the fire?
For all the period that all that exterior material was burning, yes.
You do?
Yes.
And why is that?
Well, because it was burning progressively. So the same package, if you like, was coming up and burning past the window at that time.
And does that...
I mean, there would have been more involvement of the PVC at the somewhat later stages. That's certainly true.
Right. I mean, the point is really this. Because the measurement had only collected gases for a temporary period, and at the terminal stage of the BRE reconstruction, would it not be fair to say that your calculations based on this latter stage assume that they apply to the earlier stages of the fire when no actual measurements were performed?
Yeah, so the simple fact is we can say nothing about the gas ratios that would have been measured in that time because they weren't obtained.
No, and would you accept the suggestion?
I could accept that.
Yeah.
I think it's unlikely to have been radically different, but without the data, we can't really say, can we?
No, and would you accept, therefore, that there's no robust evidence to support your assumption?
I think there's evidence to support. I haven't made any assumptions. The evidence I'm presenting is the evidence from the data that were gathered at that time under those conditions when those fuels were burning during those few minutes of the test.
Would you accept that there's no evidence reliably to assess which component, PE or PIR, is contributing the most to carbon monoxide concentrations?
When?
During this test.
During the time that we made the measurements,
Yes.
It was.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, but I obviously haven't got the data to answer that question about the earlier stages. But looking at the burning behaviour, I think once we have a big external fire established in the cladding insulation system, moving up outside between the 16 and 26 kitchens, we've got reasonably stable conditions. And of course what we do have, and I've analysed in some detail, is all the thermocouple data during that time. And I've looked very much at the temperature profiles of the surface of the PE and the PIR in the various locations in the cladding and in the spandrels and the columns over that period. So I think we can make some assertions on this point.
Right, well, in the light of that answer, can I just ask you 3 more questions on this? Can I ask you first to go to page...
Mr. Philip, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I've quite understood this. So do you mind if I ask my question before you do that? I'd understood, Professor, from what you told us earlier, that there were roughly equal contributions to the generation of toxic gases made by the PE and the insulation.
Yes.
So,
for carbon monoxide, yes.
Carbon monoxide, yes. I'm not concerned.
Not cyanide,
no. Are you suggesting now that it's possible to determine different proportions of carbon monoxide were generated by the burning of the different constituents of the cladding? If so, I'd like to understand why you're...
Let me just try and go through this again. During the period of gas sampling that we're looking at here in this particular test, I'm able to establish that when those gases were collected from that hood, then at that time, the data we've obtained are consistent with a 50-50 contribution from both the PE and the PIR, and that's based upon the relative concentrations of all these different gases, enabling me to make that calculation. And also, by looking at the oxygen depletion during that period, I'm able to demonstrate that we get a better fit to the data for a slightly underventilated condition for all that fuel, including the PE, than for a more well-ventilated condition. But I can only speak for that period of time.
Once you get a fully developed fire on the outside in the cladding,
yes,
I had understood it to be your view that the PE and the insulation made roughly equal contributions to the total volume of carbon monoxide produced.
As here.
As was the case here as well.
Yes, so that's the basis on which I've proceeded, yes.
Yes, so it's not possible, it sounds to me, it's not possible to say when a person inhaled carbon monoxide that it was generated by one or the other.
No, the carbon monoxide, obviously I established quite well what the amount of carbon monoxide they inhaled was.
Yes.
Most of the time as far as the person who's inhaling it, it doesn't matter where it's come from.
No, and indeed you could...
And that's, if you like, what we've been talking about the last couple of days. Now we're focusing very much on yields and relative contributions of different fuels. I think we're in a much more difficult area. I accept that, and I said that up front in this part of my report, that we have somewhat limited information.
Yeah. All right, I think that's...
Does that?
I think that's helped me quite a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I'm afraid I do still I consider that I need just to ask these questions, just to finish the point. Can we go, please, to page 41, table 5.4? This is calculated contributions of each fuel material to smoke and gases in flat 26, equivalent during BRE reconstruction fire test. And you show the estimated contribution to carbon monoxide there at some 8 times greater for PIR than for PE. Do you see? You've got 304 over 36. 304 for the PIR and then 36 for the PE. Yes?
Under 5.1.
Under 5.1.
Yes, exactly.
And underventilated at 1.4 to 1.5, you've got 358 and
yes.
361.
Yeah, considerably more, yeah.
Considerably more?
Yes.
Almost equal in underventilated conditions, yes?
Yes, yes.
Now,
and that fits better with the... And as you can see, that fits better with what was actually total flat that were actually measured. So the data fits much better for the more underventilated case. It doesn't fit very well for the phi = 1 case.
Right.
So that's the basis of my belief that in this very limited experiment is supporting a more underventilated case.
Well, the question, how do you know that the fire in the BRE reconstruction was burning underventilated for the 9 to 25.5 minute interval for which there's no data?
I don't know. I don't know when there's no data. Obviously, I can't say for certain.
Is it therefore possible that the fire in the reconstruction was well ventilated and that therefore the PIR was contributing more to the carbon monoxide concentrations in flat 26? During the test?
During the period when the gases are measured, we have the situation as I've reported it. Are you referring to an earlier period?
No, I'm referring to the period where you don't have any data. Is it possible that during the period for which there's no data, the fire was burning well ventilated and that therefore the PIR was contributing more by way of carbon monoxide than the PE?
I can't see that the conditions from the thermocouple data and the burning conditions as shown by all the thermocouple data and the videos, that there was a big change evident in the way all this was burning. There may have been a period when things was... And there's going to be some variation with time and between cases here. You know, we don't want to, it's not very... It's not going to be absolutely hard, but I don't really see any evidence of what you're suggesting. But the bottom line is there's no data, so I can't really say, look at this, can I?
Now, while we're on this topic, I think we can ask this question at this point. Can I ask you to go to section 6 of your report, please? At DAP,
section 6, yeah.
Yeah, section 6, at DAPR 605. We go to page 169. Now, let's pick this up here. Yes, figure 46. Now, you can see that when the FED equals 1...
FED equals 1...
A hydrogen cyanide makes a bigger contribution than the carbon monoxide, doesn't it, to the collapse of an individual who's breathing in toxic fumes? Is that right?
Hang on, let me get my brain around this.
When yes, you see, when the FED is
black, is the blue curve is the...
the dark blue curve.
The dark blue curve is a total. The dark blue curve is a total from all sources, yeah?
Yes. When it equals 1...
Yes. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, thank you. Hydrogen cyanide makes a bigger contribution than carbon monoxide to the collapse of an individual breathing in toxic fumes. I think you accept that.
Yes, it has. Yes, at that point it has. Yes, because the FeD-CO sum for CO is the red line, and the cyanide is the blue line.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, exactly. Now,
We talked about this earlier, didn't we? Yeah.
Given that the ACMPE, as you've told us a number of times, gave off no hydrogen cyanide,
Yes.
and your own figures make it clear that the FED did equal at least 1, are you able to confirm that in those cases, in this chart, 10th lobby, the cause of collapse and death was from fuels other than the ACMPE?
Both are contributing, because both are contributing to the CO. But as we discussed,
Yeah.
because of the peculiarities of toxicity of cyanide and the high concentrations of both gases in this particular situation, the cyanide is kicking in here as a bigger initial cause of incapacitation, yes.
It's a bigger cause of initial incapacitation.
It's showing up as a bigger term in this.
Right. And what about death?
No, death, once you become unconscious, and as I mentioned, and your breathing drops right down, this peculiar stimulatory effect of cyanide then disappears. And also because the dynamics of spread of cyanide throughout the body water, entire body water, it drops out to become a less significant term. And so death is more like to be, and as we can see from the CHBs in the decedents, the death was mainly driven by CO.
And that, as you say, even in respect of these, is this right? In respect of these deceased's came 50-50, in your opinion, from the PE and the PIR?
Yes.
Yeah.
And with the contribution from the window surround materials as well.
The UPVC?
Yeah, which gives a very high yield of CO.
Because of the chlorine content?
Which affects the combustion of all these materials and makes the burning of all of them more underventilated burning, where the chlorine from the PVC goes into the flame zone. That's another complicating factor here, by the way. Yes.
Yes. Now let's then turn back to DAPR 605, please. Yeah, and page 38. And at page 38, paragraph 126, you say, 6 lines down from the start of the paragraph, you say, for the specific cladding, insulation and window materials present at Grenfell, samples have since been obtained for which further testing has been carried out by Professor Anna Steck as part of phase 2 of the inquiry. Although there are minor differences in the composition and toxic product yields between these specific materials and those from the samples of the same generic polymers I've used for my assessment, the differences due to specific polymer formulations have been found to be small in comparison to the uncertainties in other aspects of the assessment. The data for these generic materials is compared with those tested by Professor Steck in section 5 of my report. So in essence, is it right that the work that Professor Steck did broadly supported the assumptions that you made about the elemental compositions in your phase 1 work?
Yes.
And therefore you were able confidently to rely on your previous phase 1 work?
Yes.
Can I ask you then to look at Professor Steck's appendix 15? And this is at AASR 5025, page 2. I'm going to throw up some data at you. This is the PIR Celotex RS 5000, which she measures gram for gram, I think. And if you look at the row which has temperatures of 825 towards the foot of the chart, you see that she's got a range of temperatures there. Sorry.
She's done these experiments at different temperatures, yes.
Well, she has, and 825 is the highest.
Is the highest, yes, correct.
That's right. And she's got a range gram for gram of between 0.0012 to 0.3174.
For CO,
CO, I'm so sorry, CO, gram for gram, yes?
Depending on the equivalence ratio. Yes.
Depending on the equivalence ratio. Now, if we can also have at the same time, side by side, your table 3, and we find that at DAPR 605, page 39. You have that at the same time, your table 3. There it is, table 3, toxic gas yields effective heat of combustion, etc., etc. Now, am I right that your table 3 is drawn from the BRE study and not Professor Steck's data?
My table is from the BRE study, yes.
Yeah. Now, can I ask you to think about the yield of carbon monoxide in Professor Steck's table at burning temperatures of 825 centigrade? And you can see the range I've shown you for carbon monoxide there.
Yeah.
0.0012 down to 0.3174. Right. Now, on that, you can consider that and compare it with your figure for an underventilated fire, fuel-rich,
I've got 0.33.
Exactly.
And she's got 0.329, so that's pretty close, isn't it?
You say that's very close. So they relate to each other.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, we did ours at 700, I think.
Well,
so in fact, there's a table in my appendix in my report where I'm comparing the nearest, which is her 750 data set with our 700 degrees centigrade data set.
I see. But if we then turn to page 5 in her appendix, at the moment we're at page 2, but if we go please to page 5 in her appendix, left-hand side of the screen, you can see her results for ACMPE,
yes,
where at 825 degrees for carbon monoxide, she's got gram for gram of 0.2245 and 0.2124.
At equivalence ratios of 1.9 and 2.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Are you able to read across those and explain how those relate to your figures in Table 3?
Well, I compared
196.
I compared the results of our test directly in the appendix of my report, and our results for PE are very close to hers, I found. So, I mean, this is for particular runs, but we did lots of different runs at different equivalence ratios, and I've compared these, the more relevant ones in my report. But anyway, just to follow up on your reasoning, so we want polyethylene.
But we're trying to compare your LDPE entry for carbon monoxide in the lower
top.
Sorry, just a minute, Professor. Let Mr.
Can I just
ask the question?
I want everyone to understand this so they can understand your answer to my question. Right, I'm asking you to compare your figure on page 39, right-hand side of the screen, lower part of the chart, fuel-rich LDPE.
Yes.
Figure for carbon monoxide of 196.
Yes.
And I want to know how that relates to Professor Steck's number on the left-hand side, where for ACMPE, bottom box, temperature at 650, with the equivalence ratios she's identified,
right.
Carbon monoxide gram for gram range is 0.2245 and 0.2124.
They're the 825 temperatures.
Right, so
Yes.
I've got to pick. I mean,
Right,
we should be
825,
better if we were looking at the actual comparison in my report. But anyway, so at this particular example here, I've got an equivalence ratio. The run I've put in here in this table is equivalence ratio of 1.71. Yes?
Yes.
And the CO yield was 0.196 gram per gram, so
Yes,
just about
correct.
0.2. And this is done at a temperature of 600 degrees centigrade. So the nearest equivalent would be her 650 experiments, but she doesn't have one done at a phi of 1.7, so we can't make a direct comparison. So the nearest equivalent in hers, although it's at a much higher temperature and therefore would give a different result, is an equivalence ratio of 1.9, which is higher than mine, and she's got 0.22, and I've got 0.196. I would say, given the difference in the test conditions, that's a very close approximation.
Right. I see. The reason I ask you is because it might be suggested that there is a discrepancy between these figures depending on whether you rely on the BRE work or Steck's work. But you say there isn't.
And I didn't say there isn't. I said, well, there isn't, but it was in the context of the uncertainties over the whole system, what such differences there are. And we really should be looking at my comparison tables.
Right, well, should we do that? It's at DAPR 6011, page 60.
It's an appendix, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
Is that what you're after?
That's the elemental composition, so we want the yields.
That probably the
Bit lower down.
next page.
So if we go down
Go
to
the next
LDPE,
page,
here we
page
are.
61.
LDPE, those are the comparisons of the CO yields. But as you can see, hers were done at a higher temperature at 825, and we do find the yields increase somewhat with temperature. So I would say those are pretty close,
Right.
and certainly well within the sort of uncertainties of all this work, and therefore not sufficient for me to need to redo my calculations.
Right, you say they're pretty close. I mean, on the STEC data I've shown you, the carbon monoxide produced by the PIR is 2.3 times more than that produced by the PE, whereas on the BRE data, the difference is only 1.6 more produced by the PIR over the PE. I mean, we could do that. We can show you the figures again.
So what are you comparing? The CO yield
Yes.
at an equivalence ratio of 1.88, for example.
Yes.
I know we haven't got one. 1.67. She's getting 0.487, and the PE at 1.89 is the two are giving quite rather different. There's one case is 0.12. No, I'm looking at the BRE. Sorry, it's 0.212 and 0.224.
Yes.
Yeah. And you're comparing that with
I'm comparing that with the BRE data, with the
BRE data. So the PI, at 650, the CO yield at 1.7 there is 0.196, and for PIR it's about 0.33, 0.35. So those are the comparisons. Yes.
yeah.
So we're saying about 0.2 to about 0.5 and about 0.35 in that particular run.
Yes.
It's a particular individual run, but they do vary somewhat.
Right. The difference
Yeah.
is significant.
In the context of what we're doing, I would say the uncertainties of the whole thing, I don't think they're so big. No.
Yeah, well, let's just try this slightly.
But they are obviously some differences. Yes.
Yes, they are. Let's just try this slightly differently. If we go back to this, I'm afraid I'm going to work from the STEC figures rather than this index. But can we go to her appendix, please? AASR 5025, page 5, ACMPE. And there, I just want to compare that again with your table 3, if I can. DAPR.
Which material are we talking about?
Just a second. Table 3, DAPR 6005, page 39, lower part, dealing with underventilated. Now I'm on the PIR.
PIR, yes.
Right. And I just want to be clear about this. In Professor Steck's data at 825, no, we need...
Yeah, different temperature, yeah.
Sorry, I'm so sorry, we need page 2, not page 5, in the left-hand side. That's it, thank you very much. Now, there, under ventilated conditions, 825, she says carbon monoxide produced by PIR when corrected for mass burnt is some 2.33 more than produced by LDPE.
Sorry, which one are you pointing at?
Well, I'm afraid I've conflated this into a conclusion. Let's try something slightly different. In your table 3, we look across.
Table 3.
Lower part dealing with underventilated shows us that the BRE data indicates PIR produces 1.66 more carbon monoxide than LDPE.
Oh.
That's 333 over 196. You see that?
No, I don't know where you are.
I can do that one easily enough. The PIR, in your fuel rich, you've got PIR at 333, Yes?
Yes, 3.
Whereas LDPE is 196.
LDPE is 0.196 for these particular runs, yeah.
Yes, so LDPE is 196 and PIR is 333, right? But Professor Steck, and you have to go to 2 different places for this, gives you different ratios. And I'll take it from me, it's 2.33 more from PIR than LDPE. Are you able to account for the difference?
There are what we're looking at here is specific test results, and they vary considerably between run and run, and the conditions of the run of the individual run within a range. And so I would say that what we're looking at is there a substantial yield of CO and cyanide from these materials under these conditions? And the answer is yes, there is. Now, obviously, there are some differences here, and it also depends upon the exact formulations. These aren't the identical formulations, but in the context of the work that I've done, I feel that the STEC work substantially validates the data that we obtained from BRE, and that was legitimate to use that.
Right. But there are differences in there. And
there are minor differences, yes.
But I'm really just seeking to establish whether the differences that I've rather ham-fistedly tried to point out to you are significant. Do you think they are?
In the overall context of what we're doing, I would say not.
Right.
Obviously, if I'd had these data at the beginning of this exercise, I might have used these numbers.
Right, I see.
And I don't think it would make any substantial difference to my conclusions, if that's the way of looking at it.
Now, let me just stick just one more go at something slightly different, but sticking with Table 3 in your report, and this I promise will be easier. Under well-ventilated conditions, at phi of 0.4, if we just have the
yes.
We have the whole of the right-hand side, please. Sorry, we need to see the whole of the thank you, yes. So you've got a phi there of 0.4 to 0.8. Right, so that's well ventilated. You've got a yield for carbon monoxide for LDPE of 15, yes?
Yes.
And a yield for PIR of 48, which is 3 times more, yes?
Yes.
And for underventilated flaming, of a phi of 1.5 to 2, a yield for carbon monoxide for LDPE of 196, and for PIR 33, as we've seen, 1.7 times greater.
Yes, go on.
Does that suggest that the PE will contribute less carbon monoxide than PIR insulation foam on a weight-for-weight basis, on a gram-for-gram basis?
Yes, and what we need to look at is the page 5 of my mixed figures, which puts this all into some context, which is the Phase 1 report, page 67.
Right. Phase 1 report, page 67. No, that's not going to be it. Let me try something.
That's 66.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
we can find it from this document.
Well, the time is getting on. We're fishing.
Well, anyway, that's just the point. No, you got it.
Is
You got
it
it.
page
You got it.
66?
You got it. So what that shows.
Right, one at once, please.
Let's take this in stages. Can we please go to page 66 of your Phase 1 report? Table 3, mass percentages of carbon, nitrogen and chlorine. Is that what you were after, Professor?
No, I wanted to show you the way the yields vary with the combustion conditions in those graphs.
Right. Let's then go to
the next page, or 2 pages on.
68.
Yes, that's what. So this is a plot from the BRE data set for all these different polymers of the relationship between carbon monoxide yield, on the top one, and the equivalence ratio. And what you can see here is, it looks very busy because we've put lots of materials on here. The yields obviously vary to some extent depending upon the elemental composition of the material, the percentages of carbon in the material. But the point is that if you have something particularly like PE, simple polymer like PE, as you can see, at very, very low, very ultra-efficient combustion conditions, sort of thing you might have in your gas boiler at home, the yield, it burns effectively to carbon dioxide, water and heat, and there's very little carbon monoxide produced. That's perfect combustion conditions. But as the combustion becomes less well ventilated, up to the 1, which is the stoichiometric mixture, then you start to see this sort of sigmoid curve of increase in yield. And so we have to think about the operating conditions that are likely to have occurred at various times during the Grenfell fire, which of course we don't know precisely because we haven't got the experimental data. But I think that you'll find there's a paragraph in my report where I try to address this. And I say, well, we're not going to have absolutely ideal, perfect combustion conditions in something as messy as the Grenfell fire. So I think we can reasonably rule out the equivalence ratio of 0.5 sort of scenario. On the other hand, particularly for the cladding insulation, which is, as we discussed, on the outside of the building, we're not talking about the right-hand end, the sort of equivalence ratios around 2 or so there, where there's only half as much air to burn the fuel as the fuel. So we're operating somewhere in that middle region. And that's why I put in various points in my report, various comparisons at equivalence ratios around 1, which I think is a reasonable assessment of where some of this burning may have occurred, and somewhat more vitiated, somewhere around about 1.3, up to a maximum of about 1.5. So I think we're operating somewhere in that, it's reasonable to say that we're operating somewhere in that middle region. That's all I can say because we haven't really got the data.
Yeah, I see, I understand.
Yeah.
Now, on the similar subject, and just in view of the time, I wonder if we can take this as shortly as we can, Professor, but can I ask you to go to DAPR 5011, which is your Phase 2 report, Section 5, paragraph 40, page 43, Table 5. And you give there the two-bedroom flat, potential mass concentrations and gas concentrations from different fuels, yes. And here, if you look at it, you see under total mass you have 90 for the LDPE-ACM, yes, and 79 kilograms for the PIR insulation.
For a two-bedroom flat, yeah.
For two-bedroom flat. They're kilograms in each case. Does that, just on its own, suggest that the carbon monoxide contribution from PIR would be higher than for ACM-PE on the assumption, on the assumption of 100% combustion of both?
Higher from the PIR?
Yes.
For a lower mass?
Would it suggest that the contribution of carbon monoxide from the PIR?
Right. When it's burning, if it was burning under the more well-ventilated condition, then we would expect a lesser contribution, as we discussed, from the PE than the PIR. Yes. If it's burning under the somewhat more underventilated conditions, they're about the same. I think it was. Yeah.
Yes. What you're seeing, though, is the CO ppm, even though the mass is higher at 90 than PIR at 79, the CO ppm.
Oh yes, sorry, I see where we're getting at now.
598, whereas the PIR insulation is at 2157.
Yes.
And the phi, where a phi is less than 1, i.e. well ventilated, but where it's more than 1, i.e. poorly ventilated, it's up in the region of 6, 2, or 7.
And that's because I assumed in these calculations, and as I said in my Phase 1 report, I treated all the PEs burning in a more well ventilated way. I've now shifted my position somewhat to feel it could be somewhat more underventilated, and therefore the contributions will even out somewhat more. And
is that based on 100% combustion of both? Or?
No, 100% combustion of the PE, but 50% of the PIR.
Right, and that is. Are those numbers taking into account the 100% combustion of the PE, but 50% of the PIR?
Yes,
they do.
Yes.
Thank you. Right. Then let's turn, please, in the same document back 2 pages to 41, page 41. the underventilated case where phi is 1.4 to 1.5, and we've seen this before, but just to go back to it, so you can see that for an underventilated case, the mass loss concentration for PIR is 1.9, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas for PE it's 3.69, in each case grams per cubic metre, yes?
Yeah.
Can you explain why you concluded that almost twice as much PE burnt compared with the PIR? There.
2 to 3.6. That is derived from the gas concentrations measured. So that's a calculated result. Yeah.
Does that affect?
I don't know why that's come out like that, but that's the way it is.
Yeah. Does it affect the 50-50 figure that you've come to in terms of total contribution of carbon monoxide in the smoke?
So we're here talking about the gases that were measured during that short period in the BRE reconstruction test.
Yes.
And then back calculating from the proportions of those gases as to how much was burned in order to produce them. Yeah, well, these figures would suggest that for that particular case, we're seeing a somewhat greater predicted mass loss of the PE compared to the PIR, but not substantially. But yes, we are seeing a slight difference there.
Right.
So that would imply potentially slightly more involvement for the PE.
Right.
In terms of amount burned.
Right.
Yeah.
And would that affect the 50-50 figure that you come to?
Slightly, yes.
Right. Tilting in.
But I mean,
well, which way would it tilt? More towards the PE and less from the PIR?
So it means that under the conditions of this test, if we take that exercise, that analysis, that it would imply that there'd been somewhat more PE burnt during that period of the fire to produce those gases. But these are very indicative of all these numbers.
Now, finally, Professor, you've calculated the mass burned of each element of the facade in section 5 of your report. In this section in front of us at page 12, paragraph 36, as about 50%. We can see that.
Yeah.
If we go to the final sentence of paragraph 36 there, you say, from my phase 1 analysis, the mass burnt of PE was approximately the same as 50% of the PIR mass, so that these two materials contributed an approximately equal mass to the exterior smoke plume. Can you confirm whether that estimate of the mass takes into account the fact that the Rainabond panels were fabricated in a cassette form at Grenfell Tower, so that they covered a larger area?
No, I didn't allow that. I just based it on the surface area, the sort of the area of the flat, as it were. So you're right. I think that because the insulation is flat against the surface of the building, correct? Whereas the PE is flat over the same surface, but then has these bits bent around the sides. That's what you're getting at.
And
I did not take that into account, and that would slightly increase the PE if you took that into account.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you able to measure that? Have you measured that in your?
No, I haven't measured that. No, but I think when I looked at Professor Bisbee's work last week, I thought about that, and I thought, well, yes, maybe that's why he's taken that into account.
Right.
I didn't. No, as a minor difference, an unknown.
Right. Thank you very much.
Of course, with the other thing I didn't take into account is that some of the PE has fallen away and dripped away and may not have burnt. So these are all very approximate, and there are various ways in which you can estimate them in different directions.
Yes. Professor, thank you very much. I've come to the end of my prepared questions, and indeed some I haven't prepared. But I'm going to ask the Chairman to take the usual break with an apology that we've gone beyond the 4:30 mark to you and to the panel. That's an apology from me, and I'm sorry about that. Mr. Chairman, can we take the usual break now?
Yes, I think you understand, don't you, Professor, that we have to have a break at this point so that Mr. Millett can check that he's not left anything out, and also so that if anyone else wants to suggest questions that we ought to put to you, they have a chance to do that.
So there may be some more questions.
Well, there might be a few more questions, but
okay.
we're going to rise for 10 minutes.
Right.
We'll come back at 5:15.
Okay.
And then if there are any more questions, we'll ask them.
Thank you.
All right?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Would you go to the usher, please? Thank you, Mr. Millett. 5:15 then, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Would you ask Professor Purser to come back in, please? Right, Professor. Well, we'll see if there are any more questions for you, shall we? Yes, Mr. Millett?
Mr. Chairman, yes, just a couple. Can I ask you please to be shown AASR 5010, page 14. This is Professor Steck's report, paragraph, or page 14. She here is identifying at paragraph 25 the extent of the fire damage to the facade, and in the third line she says, in a few places the outer aluminium composite panel remained intact, preventing direct inspection of the insulation. And then she goes on in paragraph 26. In the case of the partially burnt insulation, there was a range of fire damage. Locations surveyed exhibited A, a thin layer of charred foam on the inner board, B, a thick charred layer with complete loss of the outer board, or C, a thin or thick charred layer on the outer board with the inner board remaining more or less intact.
Yes.
And then paragraph 27, the remains of the facade around the columns was inspected, and she explains what she observed there. And then at 28 she says, the insulation, predominantly Celotex RS5000 PIR, but also Kingspan K15 phenolic foam, was burnt to different degrees around the tower. The PIR insulation foam boards appear to have responded to the thermal attack from the fire between two extremes of behaviour, and she identifies them there at A and B. A on 14 over the page 15, at B, thermal decomposition. Can we turn the page, please? Now, although she doesn't say it, she doesn't draw a distinction between the top of the tower or the places in the tower. My question is to you: did you attempt to check whether Professor Steck's data was influenced by particular areas of significant damage?
Yes, I did to some extent. She had one particular section where she looked at what they classified as flats of particular interest, where close to the areas where people had died. Mm. So really the upper parts of the tower where there was a lot of destruction.
Right.
And I'm looking at in the overall, so the overall figure she got was 51% loss of the insulation. But when you look at the individual flats, in certain places there is some variation in this. It tended to be greater destruction of the column PIR than the spandrel PIR, and as you say, we've got these two layers, and often there was considerable charring of the outer panel, of the two panels, and the other one remained intact. One thing I did notice, though, was that for the flat 6 column, which I was particularly interested in, and it may be to do with the way the fire spread, rapid fire spread up the east face, and then much slower spread around the rest of the tower. The PIR loss was somewhat less than 50% for that sort of set. I did notice there's some differences there. So there was some variation around the tower. The overall figure she came up with was about 50% overall.
Right. And what, would you agree, well, put it this way, is it possible that her 50% figure for the mass burnt would incorporate some margin of error or variation to account for the fact that more or less PIR burned in different locations on the building depending on height and orientation?
Well, yes, in different places there was different degrees of burning, and she did carefully catalogue all that. Yeah.
Now, can I ask you please to go to DAPR 5011? Sorry, 5011. DAPR 5011, page 9, paragraph 26. And you say there, a particular area of uncertainty is the proportion of fire and smoke plume from the exterior fire penetrating the flats at each floor and the proportion that rose outside and away above the tower, the complexity and inherent variability of the construction and patterns of fire development at Grenfell resulted in such uncertainty and variability that the results of any full-scale fire test could not be considered necessarily representative of the conditions occurring in different flats at Grenfell Tower. Similarly, the complexity of the construction and potential patterns of fire development meant that indeterminate variables affecting even sophisticated CFD computer methods would also give uncertain results that may not adequately represent the variable patterns of fire development and smoke penetration at Grenfell. This applies firstly to the early stages of smoke penetration as the exterior fire spread up the tower outside flats 6, then later to each room in each flat as the exterior fires spread around the tower. Is it fair to say, looking at that overall, that your view is that the results of any modelling work would be inherently sensitive to the parameters which were inputted?
Yes.
And that in a fire as complex as Grenfell Tower, it would be, to put it at its lowest, extremely difficult to derive accurate results using such a method?
I mean, I think you can do lots of quite interesting work on this, and it's not a complete waste of time to do it, but I think the inherent uncertainties involved in trying to, it's not really possible to use any specific approach to definitively say what happened, yes.
Would it be useful to use any such approach even to give you a measure of confidence beyond which you've already used?
I don't think so, no.
No. So doing modelling work would not enhance your confidence level in the conclusions you've already reached? Is that where we leave it?
That's the position that was adopted by the inquiry team, yes.
Well, what's your view?
I think it would be interesting to have done some work of this kind, but I respect the decision to regard the inherent variables and things involved, that it would not really assist the inquiry to come to a decision. So that I respect that point.
I understand. Thank you. That's very helpful. Well, Professor, it only remains for me to thank you very much for your opinions, for your lengthy reports, all of your work, and for your unstinting assistance to the inquiry both before the last 2 days and over the last 2 days. We are extremely grateful to you. You've illuminated much which was previously dark to us. So I'm extremely grateful. Thank you very much.
And Professor, it's right that I should thank you very much as well on behalf of the panel. You've given a great deal of time and effort to assisting the inquiry, both in phase 1 and even more so in phase 2. You've given us a lot of your time to explain and elaborate upon your report. And as Mr. Millett says, you've supported us in other ways as well. So we are truly grateful to you for all the support you've given us and the time you've given us. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, I hope it's been some assistance, and I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to assist in this way, and Mr. Millett for managing to get through all the material in front of him in the time available. Thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now, of course, you're free to go.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I shall get the car ready for Cornwall.
Oh, good. We'll have a good time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, well, you'd like to go to the usher.
Thank you very much.
That's it. Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Millett. That concludes the hearing for today.
No.
I think. No.
No, it doesn't, I'm afraid. I've got one very short duty to perform, I'm afraid, because this is formally the end of Module 7.
Yes.
And as you know, at the end of Module 7, we have a read-in of further witness statements, and I shall do that very briefly by reading the references in. First, MET 0003898 39829, PSB 401379, MET 3039843, DCD, which is Dubai Civil Defence, 6701, COL 701, MET 30132227, LFB 001233673, LFB 001233795, MET 30398444, MET 30399932, MET 00013116, and MET 00039845. And there is normally an IDX number which accompanies that, which would have been shorter, but I'm not sure we have it yet, and if we do, I don't have it.
Well, thank you very much. And all those documents will form part of the evidence before the inquiry and will be taken into account in due course.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Well, we've sat much later than we usually do, particularly at the end of the week, and I think I should once again, as I say, not for the first time, thank those who support our hearings. I'm thinking particularly of the stenographer, document manager, and those who are responsible for live streaming our work. We do rather presume on their good nature when we overrun it this way, but it's right to say that we're very grateful to them for all that they're doing for us. At that point, we shall rise for today. We shall sit again on Monday next week, the 4th of July, at 10 o'clock, when we shall embark on Module 8.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. 10 o'clock on Monday next week.